we are looking forward to that time. Of course, he's not made that call yet. And I think it's because he's still waiting for that last person to come to know him as their personal Savior. This is an invitation song for you. And that is, we're just asking you at the end of the service when we give an invitation, that if the Lord's speaking to your heart, you just come as you are. Don't worry about what you've been through or going through or what you've done in your past. That doesn't mean anything to God. What means something to God is where you are right now. And in that moment and in that presence. So this is an invitation song, and then I'm going to speak, and we'll give you the opportunity at the end. But if you're here this morning, you don't know Christ as your Savior, you need to make that decision before it's too late, because He is coming back. He is coming back. Tara, come and sing this beautiful song for us. Resources to talk about this title, The Meaning of Life. If you Google the meaning of life, you're going to find all kinds of different things, all kinds of answers to what they think the meaning of life is. And what I want to do is I want to take the book of Ecclesiastes, and we're going to do an in-depth study of the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to do verse by verse, and we're just going to break this apart. And I think it's one of the greatest books that we have that we can study, especially here on Sunday mornings. I've been reading David Jeremiah's book, 31 Days to Happiness. And in that book, he gave this statistical survey. And he said out of this survey, 7,948 students at 48 different colleges was conducted by a social scientist from Johns Hopkins University. And their preliminary report was a part of a 2-year study sponsored by the National Institute of Mental Health. And they were asked what they considered to be very important to them now. That's what they were asked. And these college students, 16% of them, out of all of those students, 16% of them said that making a lot of money was the most important thing into their life. But surprisingly, 75%, according to the survey, of them said that their first goal was to find the meaning and purpose for their life. 75%. And that's the end of that quote. In his book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, secular psychiatrist Carl Jung, he wrote these penetrating words. He said, about a third of my cases are suffering from no clinically definable neurosis, but from the senselessness and emptiness in their lives. This can be described as the general neurosis of our time. End of quote. How many have ever read The Purpose-Driven Life? We all have. A lot of us in this room have read that. And one of the reasons why Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life, has made it to the top of the New York Times bestsellers list. In fact, his book has zoned in on the basic need within every single man and woman to discover why we are here. Why are we here on this earth? And what meaning can be derived from our lives. And that's why it's the best-selling book. And I don't know about you, but I love Peanuts. I love Charlie Brown. And I saw this, and even Snoopy is getting in on this. And he says, where am I going? What am I doing? What is the meaning of life? That's the question that we're asking ourselves. In the introduction to his book, if you read it, Rick Warren tells about a survey that Dr. Hugh Moorhead conducted. And he wrote to 250 of the best-known philosophers and scientists and writers and intellectuals that are in the world. And he asked them, what is the meaning of life? Then he published these responses in his book. Some offered their best guesses. Some admitted that they just made up a purposeful life, and others were honest enough to say that they didn't have a clue. In fact, a number of these famous intellectuals wrote Professor Moorhead back, and they said, when you find out what the purpose of life is, would you please write us and let us know? It is the absence of the meaning and the purpose in the lives of so many people today, and especially in the lives of our younger people and our younger generation, that I truly believe that is causing so much substance abuse, so much promiscuity, even suicide among the younger sect. And someone published this note that was written by a young man before he took his own life. He was a college student, and he wrote these words before he took his life. And listen to this. To anyone in the world who cares, I ask this question: who am I? Why am I even living? Life has become stupid and purposeless. Nothing makes sense to me anymore. The questions I had when I came to college are still unanswered. And now I'm convinced that there are no answers. And there can only be pain and guilt and despair here in this world. And my fear of death and the unknown is far less terrifying to me than the prospect of the unbearable frustration, futility, and hopelessness of continued existence. End of quote. And then he took his life. That is a sad, sad statement, church. Someone who has come to believe that death, and early death, is better than what life can afford them. Well, this study that we're going to plunge right into, and we're going to plunge right smack in the middle of those questions. We're going to answer Snoopy's question. We're going to answer all of these psychiatrists' questions. We're going to answer, what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is blank. And we're going to answer that. And we have it right in front of us in the book of Ecclesiastes. The record of a man's search for true meaning of life. And this is a philosophical man's attempt to find what the meaning of life is. And I would ask, and I don't ask this much, but I would ask, I mean, we've had great attendance all through the summer, but I would ask that you try to be here every service and listen to the wise words of Solomon with the inspiration of God. There are things that we are going to cover. There are things that we are going to talk about and preach about that there's no way that Solomon would have known that. Solomon asked for wisdom. He prayed to God, give me wisdom. And God gave it to him. But there's no way that Solomon knew these things before they even existed. Or not existed, but before they were even discovered. They've always existed. And Solomon brings these things out. And I love reading about Solomon. Because what you have with Solomon is, in his earlier part of his years, he wrote what we call the love book, which is the Song of Solomon. Because that was his passion at that time in his younger life. He was in love with this beautiful woman, and that's what his life was all about. And he wrote about it in the Song of Solomon. And then about in his midlife crisis, in his midlife way, he writes the book of Proverbs, which we call the book of rules. He wrote the book of Proverbs. And I love Proverbs as well, because out of Proverbs is my life verse in Proverbs chapter 3. And we read that and we think, okay. But when he got later in his years, he began to write the book of Ecclesiastes. So he wrote Song of Solomon in his early years. He wrote Proverbs in his midlife. And he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, which we call the book of regrets, in his latter years. When Solomon reigned in his period of time, those 40 years that he was in office, as we would say, or in the kingship, there was 40 years of peace. Solomon didn't have to face what his dad faced, David, in all the years that he was king. Solomon had 40 years of peace. His mind didn't have to wonder, what are we going to do about war today or war tomorrow? So he had time. He had time to write the book of Ecclesiastes, to really do this discovery, to really do this investigation. He had time. And also that, he was a rich man. So he had all the resources to put everything together and to write the book of Ecclesiastes. He was the most intelligent man, as the Bible says in chapter 1 and verse 16. It says, and we pull it up here, I commune with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge. So he prayed for that. So he was the wisest man. And Solomon now in his life is looking back over his life, and he realized how many foolish choices that he has made over time, and in search to find what we consider the meaning of life. But it was too late for Solomon. But he's writing this so that you and I today can take the book of Ecclesiastes, and we're in our time now to understand what the meaning of life is. And Solomon gives us that wisdom. That's why Solomon wrote, he realized it in Proverbs chapter 9, in verse 10, he realized that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It's the beginning of wisdom and knowledge, as he puts it. But it was too late for him to enjoy it personally. Ecclesiastes means this. It means the gathering. And what that's talking about is gathering of information. Solomon does this investigation. And he refers himself, as we've already read, John read for us beautifully, he considers himself in Ecclesiastes as the preacher. It's the Hebrew word kohelet. And he's a searcher, if you will. He is investigating. He's gathering up information. And he's wondering what makes people tick. And he was on a mission So Solomon begins his book by giving us the conclusion first. And how many of you have read the last chapter of a book before you actually started the beginning of it? Anybody like that? You're sick. I can't do that, but I know there's a lot of people that read the back of the book, they'll read the last chapter, or they'll go and, if they're watching a series, they'll go and watch the last episode before they start it over. And I know there's a lot of people like that. Well, this is Solomon. And let's get started in this, and let's see this beautiful concept of wisdom and knowledge and put it all together for us, okay? Let's start with verse 2. And I'm using the New King James. Verse 2, it says, "Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity." That's what he says here. So when we look at that, the word vanity is used 38 times, and it's not what you think it is. It's not the vanity of beauty. It's not the vanity of vainglory. It's like the woman I heard about. She went to her pastor, and she knocked on his door, and the pastor said, "Come on in." And she walked in, and she sat down, and she said, "Pastor, I have a terrible sin." And the pastor looked at her and said, "Okay, well, I'm not a priest. You don't have to come in here and confess your sins to me." He said, "Just go to God and ask God to forgive you." And she said, "Well, I did all that, and God told me to come and tell you what my sin is." And he said, "Well, I can't argue with that, so what is your sin?" She said, "My terrible sin is I have the sin of vanity." And he looked at her and he said, "What do you mean?" She says, "I can't leave the house without looking at myself in the mirror for a good half hour to 45 minutes at all my beauty. I can't get away from the house without looking at all my beauty for a half hour to 45 minutes." He looked at her. He looked down at his desk and his notes. He looked back at her, looked back down, and he looked at her again. He says, "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to say this as nice as I can. You do not have the sin of vanity. You have the sin of imagination." I read that. I said, how quick that is, you know. But the thing is we're not talking about that kind of vanity. I don't know about you, but I hate mirrors. The older I get, I hate mirrors. I was at the barbershop a couple weeks ago getting my hair done, and I go in there to the same place, the same lady cuts my hair, and she talks to me and all that. But I hate at the end, I look in the mirror and she's cutting my hair. How does that look? Okay, that looks good. I hate at the end that she gets that little mirror and she puts it in the back. Everything here looks good, but when she puts that little mirror in the back and you're supposed to be focusing on your hairline back here, the only thing I can see is this up here. That's why I hate little mirrors. And I say, there's no helping this up here. It has died and gone on to be with Jesus, That's the way I feel about it. So I hate mirrors. But we're not talking about that kind of vanity, all right? The word vanity here means emptiness. It means ineffectiveness. It means pointlessness. It means hopelessness. It can even mean failure. The one I like is without meaning. It sometimes is referred to as a vapor. A vapor disappears. And so what Solomon is saying at the front end of this investigation, and what he's saying after all of his conclusion, and after all of his investigation, after his survey, what he discovered is that life under the sun doesn't work. And that vanity of vanities, that's a Hebrew way of writing, and when they doubled the word like they did, it was like, this is really intense. This is really intense. This is just not emptiness. This is really, really serious emptiness. And this is serious vanity. Let's go on to verse 3. So he asks this question, and he says, "What profit has a man from all of his labor under the sun? And he asked that question, basically, what do people get for all of their hard work under the sun? That's the question he's asking. What do people get? What do they benefit from all of the work under the sun? In the King James, that word is profit, and it means what is left over. When you study it, that's what it means. It means what is left over. And what Solomon is saying must be understood clearly, and I want you to listen to it carefully, because if you don't get this, then you will misunderstand the rest of the book. The book is a very true representation of one man's search for meaning. And watch this now. As if there was no God in the picture. People get confused about reading the book of Ecclesiastes because they say, man, this is Solomon. Why is he talking about life is not, there's no meaning to life? Did he know God? What he's doing is bringing this book to us and helping us understand with the inspiration of God. He's saying that life without God is meaningless. Life without God is empty. Life without God is pointless. It's hopeless. It's like a vapor that appears and then disappears. That's what he's saying. And that's where people get the misunderstanding of this book. And he's saying 29 times in the book of Ecclesiastes is the phrase under the sun. S-U-N. Solomon now is looking back over his life, and he's going to tell us what life is under the sun. All right? If he includes what's over the sun, then he would be including God. But he's saying this is life under the sun. He doesn't include God in this investigation. And he tells us what he observed about life under the sun. And may I say this, that's where people are today. That's where people are today. When they're trying to figure out what life is all about, they're trying to figure out life without God. And they think they have all the answers. But as we see in our life today and in our time today, even those who have the most money, the Hollywood people and all of this, they're taking their lives because they find out that their life is empty. They find out their life is meaningless. They've tried all those things, ladies and gentlemen. They've tried all the riches. They've tried all the fame. And they're realizing that doesn't get them anywhere. What the world needs today is God. Amen. And if we try to live our lives without God, that's where we make the mistake. And that's where people are. We can have life. God promises that. He said we can have life with God. But if we try life without God, that's where Solomon is in this investigation. What happens when we reason through life without God? He begins to give us the first 3 verses of our study. And 4 things is quite interesting and very applicable to our life today. And the first one is this. The circle of life. Trevor, not that circle of life. There we go. The circle of life. I was talking to Leslie about this the other night, and I was telling her about this message, and I was sharing with her. And last night, well, this morning, our daughter Brianna had our grandbaby, our first grandbaby at 12:06. And I was sharing with somebody before the service, they said, how did Brianna do? I said, Brianna did great. Dad didn't. I watched all 3 births of my children, and I had no problem whatsoever. But when my daughter went in there, I could not take it. I couldn't take it. Matter of fact, I said, I can't take it. I'm going into the waiting room. Leslie stayed back there. And I was sitting there waiting and waiting, anticipating and worrying. Okay, why is it taking so long? Brianna did great. Leslie said she did great. The baby is 7 pounds, 13 ounces, 21 and a half inches long. He's beautiful. I say that he's beautiful because he looks like his papa. But vanity, I'm just kidding. He's beautiful. But Leslie sends me a picture. And then, right after that picture, she sends Circle of Life. As I talked to her about this message. The first thing that Solomon talks about, watch this. If you would go home and you read the newspaper, you can read about in the newspaper, you can read about the births that are born, and then you read about, in the obituaries, you read about the deaths. And life is just the same. It's one big circle. One generation comes and another generation goes. A baby is born and someone dies. One man is born and another man dies. Life goes from beginning unto the end, and it just recycles again and again and again. Here's the thing that we have to keep in mind. Nature is permanent, says Solomon, but life is transient. It's transient. Death. You know, if I was to go out into the streets and passing out flyers and I said, hey, come up to Immanuel Baptist Church on Sunday, we're going to be talking about death. How many people do you think would come up here? Nobody would. They'd be like, what? You know, that's what they would do. Nobody wants to. They don't want to hear about it. And it kind of reminds me of a story that I heard of one Rabbi Harold Kushner in his book, When All You Wanted Isn't Enough. He recounts what a man who came to him for counseling said. Now listen to this. He said, 2 weeks ago, said the man, for the first time in my life, I went to the funeral of a man of my own age. I didn't know him well. We worked together. We talked to each other from time to time. Had kids about the same age. He died suddenly, and over the weekend, it could just as easily have been me. That was 2 weeks ago. What's got me upset, Rabbi, is that they've already replaced him at the office. 2 weeks ago, and I hear that his wife is moving out of state to live with her parents. 2 weeks ago, he was working 50 feet away from me, and now it is as if he never existed. It's like a rock falling into a pool of water, and then the water is the same as it was before. But that rock isn't there anymore. And he said, Rabbi, I've hardly slept at all since then. I can't stop thinking that it could have happened to me. And then a few days later, I will be forgotten just as he has, as if I had never died. And here's the question that we need to ask ourselves. Shouldn't a man's life be more than that? That's what he asked the rabbi. And once again, I repeat that question. Shouldn't a man's life be more than that? And that's the question that so many are asking today. Isn't there more to life than just getting up in the morning, going to work, coming home, sitting down and reading the newspaper or watching a TV program, and then going to bed? And the next morning, we get back up, we go to work, and we do this whole thing over and over again, week after week, until we're finally too old and we die. Shouldn't a man's life be more than that? Solomon is saying this. If I look at life without God in the picture, it just seems so empty. Look at this verse here. He says this. One generation passes away, and another generation comes. But the earth, what? Abides forever. And what he's saying is this. If I look at life without God in the picture, it just seems so empty. It seems pointless. It seems hopeless. It seems without meaning. It seems like a vapor. So the circle of life isn't just turning over and over, but there's meaning in it.
And I have to say this morning, it's hard to disagree with him. It's hard to disagree with that. That brings us to the second thing, the circle of the sun. Look at verse 5. In the circle of the sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. It just circles. And Solomon uses the same description that modern astronomers talk about the sun rising and the sun setting. And it's endless. It just repeats itself again and again. Every day since the creation of the world, the sun has done exactly the same thing. And Solomon says, rise, set, the same thing every day. Meaningless. Without God? Correct. Third thing, the circle of the winds. Verse 6. He says this, the wind goes toward the south and turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. Now this is Solomon, right? This is truly a remarkable statement if you think about it for an Old Testament book, because this is long before the modern discovery of the world's great wind circuit and the global circulation of the atmosphere. Before any of that was discovered, here's Solomon saying what it is. And there's no way that he could have known that as we know it of today without the help of God. Because today we have satellite coverage of weather that shows where you can actually see the wind swirling around in circles. And notice what he wrote about it. He wrote about it long before anybody discovered it and knew about it. So how God, he used this illustration in this world, and it just mechanically goes on and means to seem part of it all. The fourth thing is the circles of the water. This is fascinating in itself too. Because look at verse 7. He says, all the rivers run into the sea, yet sea is not full, to the place for which the rivers come there and return again. Now, if you study science, you know that he's discussing right here in the Bible what we call the hydraulic cycle. That's what he's doing. He's telling us that this is just like the winds, and it's just like the sun, and it's just like the generations of life. And he's saying that the things just continue to be the same, and they don't change. There's a mechanical monotony to the way that the world functions, and there's an emptiness to life that we consider without God. It's meaningless. Have you ever thought about that? Sure you have. We for a moment allow ourselves, if we allow ourselves to get caught up in this gloomy, melancholy, depressed, unhappy thinking of a world where we feel so insignificant, if we're not careful, we begin to wonder, why does it matter? Why am I here? Until we remember God. He kind of lifts us up out of that. Doesn't he? Now watch this. Look at verse 8. He gives us two thoughts. Can I close? Okay. You're probably saying, yes! Close! Let's do this. He gives us two thoughts here. Look at verse 8. All things are full of labor. Man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Watch this. He's saying, first of all, nothing is fulfilling. I love Eugene Peterson's The Message. I love it. I use it as commentary. I use it. It's just beautifully written. And he writes it this way. He says, everything is boring. Utterly boring. No one can find any meaning in it. Boring to the eye, boring to the ear. Life is boring. Now some of you are looking at me like, what are you talking about, Pastor? My life isn't boring. Remember this. Solomon is writing and he's reasoning without God. Without God. And it speaks to the restlessness that we have in our hearts as men and women. A person who doesn't have God in his life and is trying to find the meaning of life just goes from one thing to the next. They're trying to find something that will fill that emptiness busyness in their life. And Solomon is saying this: nothing is fulfilling. The Apostle Paul sums it up in Acts chapter 17, verse 21, with this encounter of the Athenians who spent their time talking about what's new, novelty, the latest and the greatest. That's why they were all about. And J. Vernon McGee used to say this, and I love this: if it's new, it's not true. And if it's true, it's not new. He was right. Solomon is saying there is no reason, real sense of satisfaction in whatever we do without God. The Rolling Stones used to sing about it. I can't get no satisfaction. This is true as Christians. We can buy a new computer, and when we buy that new computer, about 2 weeks when a newer one comes out, what do? Most of the wives are looking at their husbands right now. We buy a nice looking car, something new comes out, what do? We got to go buy it again. So what he's saying is nothing is fulfilling. Number two, he's saying nothing is fresh. The last three verses here, he says in verse 9, that which has been and what will be, that which is done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it may be said, see if there is new, if it has already been in ancient times before us? There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. When you think about those verses right there, what Solomon's saying is, everything seems stale. If something we've seen or done before, and you say, well, no, Pastor, you just said there's a lot of new things that come out. Every day, somebody's turning out something new. No, wait a minute. Nothing new that hasn't already been created. My Bible tells me in Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Everything in the heavens and everything in the earth. What we're just doing now is just discovering. And we're using those resources. It's already been created. Alright? So, we think we're so smart, and we're not. God gives us that wisdom. We don't create anything that's new. So let me say this. Look at Solomon's life in closing. At one time, his life was so close to God. He had known the meaning of God. He started out walking with God. He prayed for God's gift of wisdom. God granted it. But as he grew older and became prosperous, he began to walk away from God. And he contaminated his life with the visions of the world. And he got away from God. And I believe Solomon in his end died a frustrated, disillusioned, frustrated old man. Solomon had forsaken the God of his youth. And he had lost his meaning of life. So let me say this. Let me give you this key verse. Let's go to that key verse. And I'll leave this with you today. Because this is fascinating what Solomon says. He says this in chapter 3, verse 11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. And here's what I want you to see. Also, he's put eternity in their hearts. You see that? What he's saying is this. God created you, and he created me for eternity. Not temporal. For eternity. He's put eternity in our hearts. But right now, if you don't know God as your Savior, there's a void. There's a hole. There's a hole right there because that hole has to be filled with God's plan. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. If you try to fill that hole with a square peg, it ain't going to fit. The only place that can fit in that hole is the meaning of life. And that's God. Put God in that hole. you do that, God will be your fulfillment. God will be your joy. My Bible tells me that the thief comes to steal and destroy. But my God wants to give you life. And he wants to give you life more abundantly here on this earth. You're built for eternity, but he wants to give you life here on earth. And you can't have life without God. The meaning of life, ladies and gentlemen, the answer to that, Snoopy's question, Solomon's question, Rick Warren's book, God. God. Bow your heads. Eyes closed.